Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kakis, and today I'm going to be joined by Greg Holmes, Regional Vice President of PreSales at Aptio. Greg is also a member of our PreSales Leadership Collective Council, and you may know him as the sales engineer guy. The topic of today's episode is the global expansion of PreSales, and Greg and I are going to discuss how we, as PreSales Collective, can continue to be a global organization and support PreSales professionals around the globe. Although we started in the US, we want to provide resources and network to all pre-sales professionals, no matter where you live and what stage you are in your career. And so today's episode, Greg and I are going to talk about some of the things that Greg's doing to help build awareness to pre-sales and support pre-sales professionals in Europe and APJ, and also discuss some of our plans for the end of this year and into next year. Greg's going to be able to provide his vision on what PreSales Collective looks like globally in 2022. Enjoy. Today's episode is sponsored by Avnio. Feeling a little overwhelmed in your bid management, thinking there must be a better and more efficient way to manage RFPs, RFIs, and security questionnaires? Look no further than Avnio RFX, a Salesforce native, fully automated RFX solution designed to help you win more of the right business. To learn more, head over to avnio.com or search Avnio in the Salesforce App Exchange. Greg, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How's it going?
Hey, James. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm happy to have you on the podcast. You are no stranger to the PreSales Collective. You're extremely involved in the community. You run Clubhouse, which we'll get to. So it's about time that we bring the sales engineering guy on the PreSales Podcast.
Oh, it's a great opportunity. And thanks for everything you guys have done at setting up the PreSales community with the collective and everything.
Speaking of which, Greg, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a PreSales Collective event in London. I had plans to go. Unfortunately, my plans changed, but I know Kevin from the PreSales Collective made it out. What was it like getting together with PreSales professionals that you've been connecting with virtually for the past 18 plus months?
Well, you know what, James? I don't think I've ever been in a situation where you've had so many pre-sales people in one room at one time from different backgrounds, different companies, and it just was exciting from the get-go. We had about 80 people, I believe. Kevin might say I'm exaggerating here, but I'm sure there was more who wanted to come too. I've since heard so many people who feel like they missed out, that they wanted to come and all of that. So I think the good news is the organizers are going to do more of them. Elizabeth, Paul, some of the others, they're all talking about the next one, and we'll do more interesting things as it goes on. So I'm super stoked to have been there. I got to meet some people who I speak to regularly on the Clubhouse call in real life. And it's just, I think one of them was saying how interesting it is because you don't know what to expect when you meet people for the first time in real life. How tall are they?
Yeah, that's the question everyone wants to know. How tall is this person?
How do they dress normally? All of those kinds of things. But yeah.
I love to hear it, Greg. And, I think that is why we started local communities and local chapters of PreSales Collective, is just to get everybody in the same room. And for me too, I've met more people in the last 18 months than any year or combination of years in my entire life, and haven't had the opportunity to meet many of them in person. So love that London event happened. I can't wait to do another one. I definitely can't wait to be there as well.
We look forward to having you.
So Greg, before we get started, let's talk about your pre-sales career journey. What got you to where you are today?
That's a great question there, James. So I'm currently leading up a European pre-sales team at Aptio. For me, this is like a really exciting part of my career, stepping into leadership and being responsible for a region and the growth and the forward planning. But where I started was right back at the beginning as a graduate. And I know, we've recently been looking to expand the idea of pre-sales as a graduate step into a role. But back then, I didn't feel like it was very typical at all. I graduated from Sydney University. I studied maths and computer science. So I was a pretty traditional person for coming into a role like that, maybe from background. But I picked up a role at a local software vendor. And for me, that was a very exciting first step into my career, being able to work for a vendor, someone who was respected locally and dealing with the enterprise sector. So for me, that was an exciting first step. This vendor became ManageSoft, and I stayed there until they were acquired, 8 years later by Flexera. So for me, it was an interesting first step. But while I was working for them in Sydney, I did a couple of years in Sydney as an individual contributor. There was a chance to help out expanding the business overseas, and still as an individual, right? But for me, this was really exciting. It was a trip of a lifetime for me at the time. So I was promised a 6-month tour where I got to go to the US and stay out in New England and then off to Germany. And this was ideally going to last 6 months. It ended up lasting for me 5 years. So to say this was life-changing is underestimating it completely. For me, it really set where I was going in my career. And I never really returned home from that. So even after Germany, I went to the UK to help open up a London office and expand, and stayed there and survived the acquisition, right? So around this time, I started blogging about pre-sales myself. So for me, that was a very formative kind of time.
That's amazing, Greg. I love the experience. And it's funny how sometimes we have a plan of like 6 months or 1 year and it turns into multi-year. But that ability to go and travel the world on pre-sales, I mean, that's how I got into this profession as well. I got to actually go to Europe and travel Europe, and I didn't even own a passport at the time. So it was a really wonderful experience, and it opens up a lot of doors. And I think it opens up your eyes to culture and to different ways of doing things. And I think it's helped me be a better pre-sales professional. I'm sure the same for you.
I would say so. The cultural awareness part, I think you need to listen in different ways to different audiences, understanding how they ask questions. Are you talking over them continually, or do you need to give them a little bit of extra space in the conversation and make sure that you understand what they really want from you?
That's a great segue, Greg, into today's topic of global expansion of pre-sales. And I think your background lends really well into this topic. And you mentioned that you had done some blogging. So while you might be known as Greg Holmes, sometimes you're known as the sales engineer guy. What made you decide to start blogging and start the sales engineer guy?
For me, I got a lot of insight into computing, into technology and other areas, listening and reading other bloggers, seeing other people's perspectives. If ever I was tuning up my PC or my demo kit, I was reading from people who are into tuning gear, not just waiting for some pre-sales leader to tell me, Greg, you got to tune up your system better and this is how you should do it. In fact, I'd say the last person someone should come to right now and ask, how do I make a better demo system or things like that, would be your pre-sales leaders. I think you want to ask the real technical people who understand building systems. So for me, starting that was really about sharing my thoughts and insights into pre-sales and trying to build a community, or at least build connections to other pre-sales people. I was amazed actually by writing these articles and asking for feedback and sharing them with people. I'd hear back from really high-level pre-sales experts, published authors, people I really respected. And it gave me an ability to really think about and develop myself as how the role worked as pre-sales, first as an individual, then as a manager later in my career.
I appreciate all the work that you do with Sales Engineer Guy and all the blogs that you put out there for the community, because I think this community, again, is just starving for content, right? There just hasn't been enough out there. So it's awesome that you're doing that. As we shift to your involvement in PreSales Collective and in global expansion, one of the things with PreSales Collective was we always want to make sure that we were not this US company that said that they were global. I've worked with EMEA for most of my tech career. And so I've seen what that experience looks like when it's done well. And I know of some experiences when it's not. For you, you applied to the PreSales Leadership Collective Council and you're a member. So what was your intention on joining the council?
First of all, I thought it was a good chance to add some value back to the PreSales Collective in the part that I was most relevant to. So whilst I still will do individual contributor kind of work and do demos and marketing events and things like that, my stronger area today is in helping build and run a team and organize how we build up pre-sales as a function from Europe and globally. So I have a role both locally and in the global team for Aptio. So in reaching out to the PreSales Collective about this, for me, it was that Europe and minority areas, right? You go to your organizational's big events, you turn up to sales kickoff for your company, and suddenly, you used to be able to talk to your colleagues and getting heard by them. And then suddenly you're a minority interest in a really big audience and trying to get your lesser known interests across. I need localization for my country, or I need a server put into certain regions so that people will put their data there. you have interests that don't match the whole organization. So you need a way to get that message across. What's the overall importance? And it shouldn't just be a straight vote that 50% of people don't think that's important. So we're not going to spend any money there. So on the PreSales Collective, it's a similar thing. There are different audience needs from a European perspective, and you need people with that perspective to try and get that message across.
I love that perspective, Greg. And it brings back to a conversation that I had with the doc leadership team. And we were just talking about experiences working with US based companies and creating awareness in EMEA. Tim Brome had actually given an example of how he reached out for content and the team kind of pushed back, but then they literally just took an English document and translated it. And it actually did not translate well. It did not resonate with the audience. And I think that's something that happens all the time. So there's those nuances that sometimes don't necessarily get communicated well to the broader group, like you're mentioning. And so I really like that perspective that you've shared. You've really put an emphasis on helping grow pre-sales generally, but it's specifically in EMEA. And so I am curious your thoughts on where do you think Europe is compared to North America and the US on the pre-sales maturity curve?
There's a pretty strong tradition of pre-sales in Europe, I believe. So it's been around for quite some time. My whole time in Europe, people have been called sales engineers or pre-sales consultants or solution consultants, and they've been in the sales organization typically. So they've always had that tradition. But I feel like one of the differences is that due to language and localization issues, most teams need to act as local generalists. So instead of being able to fly in the specialist on databases, because this is a database-based opportunity, you need to have the local language speaking person be able to express their understanding of that and take questions away and things like that, but to support their colleagues and develop those opportunities. And I think individuals also need to broaden out and help with, say, marketing, translating materials. As you said, with the German example, dealing with some of the local issues, and your product actually might pick up new and additional use cases that might be even stronger in the local areas. So you might actually need a completely different marketing campaign and a completely different message to get across.
I can relate back to early in my career where I remember we were selling to a company in Mexico, and the leadership team was actually Portuguese speaking. And we didn't have anyone on the pre-sale side that could support those conversations, but there was someone from post-sale who came in to do that. And they were navigating through that situation, as you said, as a generalist, because they weren't really on the sales side. Fast forward maybe 8 years, she is one of the best pre-sales professionals I've ever worked with. That experience helped make an impact, but I saw that example firsthand. And I think it's so interesting that you bring that up again, because when you talk about like US based and North America based companies that are English speaking, there's an assumption of how teams should work globally or how teams should function. But to your specific example, the idea that you have to be a generalist because you have to speak the specific language is really critical. It really makes a difference. And how you sell in France versus Germany, and we talk about APJ, but like Japan, it is totally different. Those things and those nuances really do impact a pre-sales profession. And
just to jump in, I think it goes beyond pre-sales even, that your local technical team, at some points, you'll have a non-pre-sales person coming in, helping as a pre-sales person for part of the deal. You'll need to emulate what your product team might say to a customer, because your product team aren't going to be as effective to the local audience.
That reminds me of a personal example. When I was working at a company called Revenate, I was over in Amsterdam, and I was working in Amsterdam for about a month. And we had some of our biggest customers in Europe. And I'll never forget that it was middle of the night US time, and I'm working, and we had a fire drill, a complete fire drill, and no one in the US was available. And so I had to take someone in the office that was like the most well-versed person and say, hey, I need you to jump on this call with one of our biggest customers and help us walk and navigate through that. And I will tell you, my level of empathy has forever changed from that example. You're right, because it's more than just the pre-sales org. It's the entire organization. And I think sometimes it's easy to let that message sometimes just blow right past us. That leads me to my next question. We continue to emphasize some of the local differences and the regional differences with pre-sales. But why is it important for the pre-sales collective to have a voice and a brand around the globe?
I think the PreSales Collective is going to have members all over the globe. From what I've seen on Clubhouse, and we'll get onto that later maybe, but people have wanted to join these calls from all sorts of locations. The Friday call has had people from APAC, from West Coast US, all the way over to Middle East, Africa, and all sorts, right? So everyone wants to be part of this great thing that PreSales Collective is. But it also needs to then have the right voice and brand back into those local communities. And I think it needs to do it soon. I think organizations that take a long time or too late to go international might find that they're more rigid, they're less flexible, and so they can't adapt quickly enough for local sensitivities, right? And other organizations might rise up in that case. But then, if you don't consider local needs, one size won't fit all. You do need to think about it. And it's funny because internally at work, we get into talks about case studies and good analogies and things to bring up. And you almost always get the US sporting analogies, which you can't just repeat in Europe, right? You can't talk about, well, it's the fourth down, right? We're shaping up for a kick. I barely know what it means myself, and I'm trying to explain it to a customer, right? You need to completely rethink how you explain things to the local audience. That's just an example, but you think about how teams work, what the hierarchy is like at work, whether people just follow orders or are they looking to be fully autonomous themselves. And I think autonomy, if I have to say one thing that team members ask me for all the time, they want more autonomy. And they get it. But I think autonomy is one of those key things that makes a pre-sales person great, is that they do know what to do. They do know how to go and do stuff that you would never think to tell them that they should be doing.
I've always had a philosophy as a leader that I should be providing about 60 to 70% of the day-to-day. I should be giving you the framework. I should set you up for success, but that 30 to 40% should be on you for creativity, individualism. What are you going to do with that extra percent to go the extra mile and to set yourself and part of your brand? And I actually have that philosophy with PreSales Collective. I mean, I've been very open about this. We really care about our brand, right? We want to make sure that everything that we do is done really well and that people have a good experience on it across the globe. Sometimes that's harder to do, but we've really been wanting to empower so many people to get involved and get engaged, because that's really what PreSales Collective is. It's not the James show or the UG show. It's a platform to empower amazing pre-sales professionals doing amazing things all over the globe. That's what we're really trying to do. So Greg, I'm putting you on the spot right here. As we talk about brand and voice around the globe, what would you say has been successful?
I think the initial excitement and the growth of the organization, you get hundreds of people from Europe, sometimes calling up into the middle of the night to join all of these sessions and share their thoughts. And they're doing it because they're passionate about the role that they do. So I feel more than anything else, PreSales Collective and the Leadership Collective have both picked up on that passion that people have and given them a place to focus on it. People are passionate about helping other people and helping themselves get better. And so I think if you go and measure this, if you had a magical measuring stick that could measure pre-sales effectiveness, you go around the world to these organizations that have been part of the PreSales Collective, and you'd find that their pre-sales effectiveness has gone up massively.
I'm happy to hear that. And, I actually was having a conversation with Chris White, Demo Doctor, today. And we were talking because I've known Chris since we pretty much started this idea. He was our first webinar guest. And we were talking about how much momentum has happened around the globe. It is really amazing to see. And I think a lot of the unified voices in terms of how we as a profession want to be viewed, treated, compensated, all those things are really coming to light and unifying across the globe. And I think that's what's been amazing to see. And even with the things like Clubhouse and local events in Europe and APJ, I mean, it's all very similar content across, which is actually wonderful to see. But where do you think we have some areas of opportunity and growth when it comes to EMEA and Europe specifically?
So it's about getting critical masses of people so that we can run more local things. It's a chicken and egg kind of problem. But as you see, there's many strong people, individuals who are taking part internationally. And I'm sure those people will be a great way to get started more locally as well. It's that two-way thing. People in Europe, not everyone's going to turn up to a 9 p.m. local time session just to learn more about pre-sales. For some people, it might just be a job. But for other people, it's a pursuit, it's a passion, it's a career. So those people will help us build up more regional events, more local language. So we're looking at UK, Germany, France, Netherlands, already looking strong, but we're looking to get those people together with more roundtables, more localized events, maybe even some face-to-face meetups. You never know. But getting those people together to revisit some of these early big themes that we've run internationally and think about them more in a local context. Each local region has its own different labor laws and its own different challenges for hiring and for growth of individuals in pre-sales. We might not have the right training available in all languages. And, some teams will do better getting everyone around Europe together because they're a small pre-sales team. And other organizations might do better at getting their regional teams together to do things in a group themselves, right? So both of those things, I think, are opportunities. And I think the other big opportunity is attracting the talent to pre-sales still. I'd say, 60% of my recent pre-sales hires for my team have all been people outside pre-sales. I value experience, right? I want more experienced pre-sales people, but it's not easy just going and hiring for experience. It's a funny market right now.
It really is. And we've done a lot of conversations on the war for pre-sales talent and the real supply and demand issue happening in this profession. But Greg, you talked about opportunities. And so I am curious if you want to share some of the projects that you're currently working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Clubhouse, for one, currently for me, it's a weekly call. To quote someone on the call, I'm looking forward for this every week to fill out my mental well-being. It's something that they look forward to. They'd rather take that call than try and squeeze in another customer meeting or squeeze in extra admin stuff. It's about connecting and talking about a topic with some peers, right? We get 20 to 30 people a week. It's usually a lively conversation. We don't always just bash up the rep pre-sales relationship. Sometimes we get onto higher level kind of ways of talking about it. But I've got a shout out too for that with Arms Magilla in APAC and JR and Jurica for them creating and running an APAC call as well. So it's going well. I'd love to see more of those other calls regionally come up, but it's that critical mass issue. What else have we got? So we've got some PSLC, or the Leadership Collective roundtables to do local language groups around Europe. So that's going to launch towards the end of this year, but we're going to do that. And I think first up, we'll have Germany, we'll have France, and we'll probably have the Netherlands or Benelux region. They'll probably do an English language theme because there's a lot of English speakers there anyway. But there is value in just getting that local group together as well. And of course, the UK will get those leaders together, either in London or maybe up north. That's what's been suggested by some of those members. So we need to be mindful of geography as well as language. But some of those will be local or in person, some will be remote. It's been a pretty exciting 2021 for the PreSales Leadership Collective, and I think we'll just keep it going.
I got to say thank you so much for all the work that you've done. I love the plans for language-specific roundtables in EMEA. I just think it's what we've been lacking from the Leadership Collective. I think there's so much good content. I mean, we've moved to content every single week, which has been really unbelievable. Of the 300 members, I mean, we have participation from almost everybody in one capacity or the other. But I think that doing these things in German or French or Spanish are going to make a massive difference. And I think we can really continue to, as the Americans say, put your money where your mouth is and really let our actions speak louder than our words when it comes to creating a global community. We're talking about what are some of the initiatives that we're working on and that you're working on. Paint us the vision. What does 2022 look like for PSLC in EMEA and in APJ?
So pre-sales leaders, Europe and Asia Pacific, will be able to have more focal events. The critical mass of people who want to run sessions, but also the attendees to get together and run sessions in an appropriate time, an appropriate place, in appropriate language. And I feel like language, we've mentioned it a few times. The other thing about doing it in the right language is you'll draw different, strong people to the front. There's a lot of people that might be good at listening in English, but they don't want to expose themselves. They're not ready to make a big statement about something in their second language or their third language in some cases, right? So they might stick to the back in some of those meetings or not even attend. But as soon as it's in their local language, you'll see those people light up and become really passionate, really excited. So I don't want to overemphasize it, but I do think it's one of the key critical things. Other things, we could do localized book club. There's some local authors of pre-sales books coming for now within Europe. So that would be good. Bigger contribution into the global events as well. So I think we'll expect to see more speakers coming from the international community, more clubhouse, as I mentioned. And here's one for you, James. What about adding some kind of external awards and recognition for pre-sales efforts? I don't know if you want to measure up how well is someone doing at selling for one company versus people selling for another company, but I think there's other things, right? There's contributions to the industry. I'd love to see, international pre-sales individual of the year or something like that. I don't know who's going to win it. I'm sure there's going to be a pretty big shortlist for that, but I think it'd be a great prize to be giving out next year.
I love the challenge, Greg, and I really appreciate you painting the vision of what 2022 looks like. One of the things that Eugene and I started from the beginning was we wanted to do some sort of awards and recognition. But I think to your point, it's how do we measure that? That's happening in people's individual companies. But I think it's a measurement of like impact on the community. And we're actually working on some things in Slack. I don't want to get ahead of myself too much that will start rewarding people for asking great questions and answering great questions and networking, right? So we're going to start that social currency as a step one. And I'm taking it as a challenge. Like, how do we do an external rewards for next year?
I think I've got one more big thing that I think should be important for 2022 is also looking at the diversity and inclusivity of the pre-sales community as well, because it is a tough area to get into. People like me have probably relied on our networks for hiring far too much and just hiring people with same backgrounds, same kind of schools, universities, things like that, companies that we work for. And you need to look at where is the new talent coming from, and also who do your customers listen to? Because they don't just listen to people like me. They will listen to a whole bunch of people. And chances are there is someone in a situation that they'll be a very good pre-sales candidate. They might not have thought about it themselves. And when you publish a big list of requirements for your roles and you haven't gone and approached them and said, I think you should apply for this, you set up a big barrier to entry. And I think that's, for me, one of the main things as well, individually, that I'm looking at is how do I get away from just hiring from the same pool?
I'm happy that you brought that up, Greg. And I think that's a great comment and an important one as well. We just released the State of Diversity in Pre-Sales report in partnership with Sales Talent Agency. And the reason why we did that is that we want to benchmark. We want to put those numbers out there and say, hey, this is where we are in October, November, December of 2021. And how can we measure the diversity that happens in this profession year over year? And I think that's a challenge that we've taken on with Pre-Sales Collective. I'm glad you brought that up. And it sounds like you're already making progress there because 60% of your recent hires have been non-traditional pre-sales talent. And this is something that Dave Maloof brought up at our Pre-Sales Leadership Collective Leadership Symposium in June that has continued to resonate with me. Talk about like fishing references. He says that so many times we fish out of the same pond. And it's so true. It's so true. We go to the same customers. We go to the same competitors. We pull out people with the same talent, yet we want to hire roles and entry-level roles and require someone to have 10 years experience. I think this is why we started Pre-Sales Academy as well. But I'm really glad that you brought that up, Greg.
So yeah, 2022 looks like a fantastic year for pre-sales.
We said it in early 2021 that it was going to be the year of the pre-sales professional. And I think that is definitely true. And I think 2022 is how we expand and grow on that. Greg, it's great having you on the podcast. I really appreciate everything that you do for the community, everything that you do for the profession. So I'm going to ask you an advice question when it comes to brand building and engagement, because as you mentioned, you just took a leap and started writing a blog and started connecting, and you've continued to put content out to the community. So for people that are listening that want to get engaged and don't necessarily know where to start, what advice do you have for them to getting engaged and building on this amazing momentum that we have in the pre-sales profession?
I think by getting your thoughts out there and engaging in conversations, don't feel like you're not good enough to be on a round table or on a panel or any event like that, or even just publishing or posting something onto Slack or to LinkedIn. Getting your thoughts out there is the only way you can, A, validate, am I onto the right track here? But also you might be saying something that even someone more experienced, someone more successful or wherever their position, they might have not considered it from your perspective and how your ideas might be even more game changing than you thought. So get those ideas out there. I feel like pre-sales is changing. There's a lot of modern techniques that are really useful, getting more video, getting more content that might hit your customers asynchronously to your meetings. That could actually be as a bigger game changer as just trying to learn what worked in pre-sales 10, 15 years ago. So the game is totally changing. Pre-sales is a good role and a big role. And the only way to develop is to keep working on things yourself and getting feedback.
So well said. The world is changing around us. It's on us to evolve with it. And for pre-sales professionals to get engaged and voice their opinions. Greg, it's been great having you on the podcast. Again, thank you for all that you do. Appreciate your time, and I'll see you on an event soon.
Thanks, James. Really appreciate it.
Talk to you next time. All right, Pre-Sales Collective, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Greg is a perfect example of somebody who wanted to put out content, build his brand, and help elevate the pre-sales profession by starting his blog. It's really turned into much more than just that. And Greg has done an amazing job of leading Clubhouse and helping the Clubhouse group grow and our leadership collective. We are really excited to be able to offer roundtables and events in different languages that cater to the local audience. Greg said it best. If you have someone who is maybe French speaking and you have an English speaking event and they're not as comfortable speaking up in English, it will deter them from being engaged and active. And so that's, for us, one of our biggest priorities in 2022 is to continue to provide support to the global profession. And one of the things we wanted to bring up in this episode are just some of the nuances with working with other cultures and other regions, and especially pre-sales teams with different languages. Because as US companies or US specific pre-sales, we may not always have that lens and those small things that really can make a big difference to our counterparts who don't have the local support or they're in satellite offices for their company. And so it's a very exciting time to be in pre-sales and to continue to work together. My challenge for everybody listening is if you want to get involved, you want to get engaged, you want to focus on building your brand, you would like to lead an event, you want to write a blog, please reach out to me in Slack. You can also email me at james.kakis@presalescollective.com. We want to help elevate and amplify the amazing things that are happening around the globe and around the profession. And especially as you're doing some personal goal setting for 2022 and want to work on your brand and get more engaged, Pre-Sales Collective can be that platform to support you. All right, Pre-Sales Collective, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you next week.